Thank you. Hello, so my name is Jeannine Vegh, and with me on my first video blog today is the award-winning author Evelyn Kohl LaTorre, who is coming to us from California. So welcome, Evelyn.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, it's good to have you here. All right, so I'm going to read your biography before we get started in talking about your wonderful book, Between Inca Walls. Evelyn Kohl LaTorre grew up in rural southeastern Montana, surrounded by sheep and cattle ranches before moving to California with her family at the age of 16. She holds a doctorate in multicultural education from the University of San Francisco and a master's degree in social welfare from UC Berkeley. She worked as a bilingual school psychologist and school administrator in public education for 32 years. Evelyn loves to explore other lands and cultures. To date, she and her husband have lived in and traveled to close to 100 countries. You can view her stories and photos on her website, evelynlatorre.com. So today, her first published book, Between Inca Walls, is about falling in love while serving in the Peace Corps. And this has won much praise and amongst numerous prizes recently garnered are the first place Chanticleer International Hearten Award for uplifting and inspiring nonfiction. Her second book is going to be coming out September 28th of this year. It's called Love in Any Language, a memoir of a cross-cultural marriage. And this relates to the challenges and triumphs of a long marriage to someone from a foreign country. Evelyn is often a featured podcast guest, lecturer, and guest blogger. Her work has appeared in Worldview Magazine, the Delta Gamma Bulletin, and the California Writers Club Literary Review, the Tri-City Voice, Dispatches, Conscious Connection, and Clever Magazine. So, okay, so let's take it away, Evelyn, and talk about this wonderful book that you wrote.
Yeah.
Well, what you wrote about your time in the Peace Corps, and that was, I believe, 1964 to 1966, correct?
Right. Correct.
Okay. And so before we get into the book, let's just do a little plug for the Peace Corps. What would you say to a young person who is wanting to join the Peace Corps?
Well, and it isn't just for the young people. There are people that are older.
Whoops.
There are older people. I was telling me to get ready for your interview.
Oh.
Forgot to turn it off. Sorry. No, but there are people of different ages, but it does seem to be that idealistic young people just out of college, that's who mostly applies. That's who applied when I went in. And that's still pretty much the number of people that go in. Excuse me.
Uh-huh. So it's not just 18-year-olds that go in, but that's probably the ideal.
Yeah, there were a couple people in my group. My group that went to Peru had 121, I think. I can't remember, 102, 121. It's in the book. And a couple of them were not college graduates. One I just recently was in contact with. And but you had to know what you were doing because a lot of them were selected out. By the time we got to Peru, there were only 70 left that did not leave on their own accord or were not selected out. And I think they still do that, but they're very careful now of who they choose. I mean, they always have been. We had to be vetted by the FBI. I mean, they went around asking professors, and I'm not clear on what the present situation is, but I know there's still a lot of people that go into the Peace Corps. Right now, they have pulled out 7,800 volunteers from the countries because of COVID, and they're reassessing how they want volunteers to go back in. There's a lot of, like with a lot of people after the COVID, a lot of soul searching as to, are we doing the right thing? But my advice would be, yes, it is very worthwhile going in at whatever age. I don't think I could go back now, but because it helps you to get to know yourself. Anytime you travel, I think you get to know yourself. It's like being a child again, because you have to learn a new language and you have to learn customs and you have to, observe what other people do and what the right thing is to do. And it for me, it had a very positive influence on my future. And most of the volunteers that I'm in communication with, they say the same thing, that they got a lot more out of it than they contributed to the country, although there have been big contributions to other countries. It's a real adventure, and it has helped a lot of people in their careers. We have a lot of ambassadors and people that are in the Foreign Service that were in the Peace Corps before.
And you also, sorry for interrupting, don't you also get a scholarship if you to go to college?
Well, you can apply for a scholarship. When I was in the early years, and I think you got some points. I didn't even know this till recently. When you apply for county or state jobs, you get brownie points. You know how that you can get points if you've been in the military or something. Mm-hmm. So that can help. But there are scholarships. There are former directors of the Peace Corps. There's what's called the Cloverdale Scholarship, and you can apply for that. I don't know that I either didn't know about it or there weren't that many, probably not that many when I came out, but people do like to support volunteers. And I have to say, the other day I was in the parking lot of Costco, and I had gotten a few years ago a bumper sticker that said former Peace Corps volunteer. And a woman came up to me and said, thank you for serving your country. I felt really proud. It just made me feel really good. So I don't put bumper stickers on my car as a rule, but I'm keeping that one there.
Yeah, so. Me neither. Yeah. Or maybe you could get something to go around the license plate.
I have another one for an educational group that I belong to on that one. So there's just so many of these identifiers that I can keep up.
So you do have two, a bumper sticker and a license plate frame.
Yes, right.
That's one of the things that I think is kind of unique about California is the bumper stickers. Yeah. Because I don't see that so much when I was driving cross country to return to Ohio. And here in Ohio, I don't see it that often. I might see it downtown in Columbus with maybe around the Ohio State University, but otherwise, as a rule, I don't see too many bumper stickers here at all. That was actually my first thing to notice when I went to England because at the time I was living in California, and I went to England and I was driving with my then boyfriend, who was British. And the first thing I said was, "Oh wow, people don't have bumper stickers here."
Yeah, I know in California, we let people know what we believe in.
I know. I know. But for me, it's like, I'm not going to spend all this money on my car just to put a bumper sticker on it, right?
Well, I tend not to. That's, like I said, that's the only one I have. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's okay. All right. So back to your book. So it was a very well-written book. I loved it from beginning to end. And I think what got me excited about it was that it was a woman's story. And I think also I've always kind of thought it would be exciting to go to Machu Picchu and to see the ruins. I think it was sort of, the book helped me to escape. And that's what I think makes a really great book, is when a book can help you to be in another world, in another lifestyle, culture, and feel like you're not sitting on your couch. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well, and interestingly enough, for several weeks, and it's still pretty up high on Amazon. It was #1 for a long time in Peru travel. And I think with the pandemic, people, couldn't go there, unfortunately. And so, travel, reading books about where you want to go is another way to do it. The other thing I was going to mention is I'm sure you realize this, far few biographies of women than of men. I mean, our history is replete with all kinds of stories that men have written and that have been written about them. And that's why I published with the publisher I did. Brooke Warner started She Writes Press because when she was working for Seal Press, the upper echelon of men would pass on these very good books that she would be recommending. And so she just started her own She Writes Press, and she publishes, I think it's 80 books a year by women.
Oh,
and
wow.
Very good. I almost read exclusively memoirs now. And they're just, women write really good books. I mean, women can be good writers.
That's right. Isn't that it's kind of shocking, isn't it?
Yes.
Besides my website, discerninggal.com, I also have OhioWomen'sHistory.com, and it is so frustrating trying to find information on women in Ohio's history. And a lot of times I have to buy a used book or an old book that was written a long time ago, or I go to a museum and try to collect information. I actually wrote one piece on Maud C. Waite, who was the first, one of the first people to be elected to the Senate, the state Senate, after women got the right to vote in 1920. And I did a piece for, it was a social worker organization that was collecting suffragist type biographies for the 100th anniversary, which was a year ago. And so they were looking for volunteer writers. So I volunteered, and then I said, who do you got from Ohio? And they gave me a couple of names. And Maud was the only person I could find information on. And then I was really excited because we shared the same birth date. So it was like, yay. But it can be very difficult finding these stories.
I've heard that a lot of women go hunting for journals, that women might have kept journals in the early days, even though they weren't published. I don't know where people find the journals. I know for the Peace Corps, they have asked us before we die to send our journals into, I think it's there are two places we can send them, JFK Library or the American University Library at Georgetown. There's a place. And not only that, they want artifacts that we're going to have our own museum.
Oh, wow.
No,
I didn't have one.
It's online. It's online now, and we're going to have our own. I don't know what it's going to look like, but monument. Let's say in Washington D.C., they have the land, and I think they're looking at designs for Peace Corps. So the Peace Corps has been around for 60 years. This year we celebrate our 60th anniversary, and people in the beginning, Sergeant Shriver was the first director. He didn't believe. Well, he did believe in it, but a lot of people didn't think it would be around.
Gonna last.
Yeah, that one administration would destroy it. Now, when Nixon was in, he did cut the budget way back, but we've held our own because we're a separate agency, and both Republicans and Democrats are behind it.
Good.
Feels good.
So it's got that bipartisan connection there.
Well, it gives a really nice image of the United States. I mean, if you did anything, it's that people could meet real people who weren't tourists and who weren't rich and weren't telling them, what to do. We were working with them. And that still is the case. We go in where we're invited and work on projects that the country says they need help with. One of the problems is that if you're just out of college, you're not an expert in anything. And that was my case. I had majored in psychology and sociology and loved courses about other countries, but I was not an expert. So that's why I relied on my experience with the 4-H clubs in Montana. And we started 4-H clubs
Exactly. And you learned to speak Spanish, but you also learned to speak Quechua. Is that?
Well, no, my husband speaks Quechua, and he was raised where people spoke Quechua, and I would have liked to have been fluent in Quechua, but that's why I couldn't do community development out in the countryside, which I thought we had been trained to do. But I had taken 3 years of Russian, believe it or not, in college.
Uh-huh.
And you know, that just
worked real well in Peru.
right. No, you know why I took it? Because it was the first year it was offered, and I like to do things that are unusual and different.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, yeah, okay. And then the Cold War was on, and I thought, well, maybe it'll come in handy. It was very hard to learn. I think it's a very beautiful language. I hadn't thought that before I studied. And then I took one, I had spent a summer in Mexico and learned some Spanish. And when I came back to college for my last year, I took a year of Spanish. So my ear had gotten accustomed to it. And then in the Peace Corps, they just, give you language training, like, most of the day. So that's where I learned a lot of it, was actually in Peace Corps training. And then falling in love with somebody who was kind enough to correct my Spanish. And he only spoke Spanish. So I had to, if I wanted to get to know him, I had to speak Spanish. So it's a real motivation.
Exactly. Now, I never asked you this before, but do you guys speak Spanish at home, or do you speak English?
Unfortunately, we just speak English now, and we started doing that when our youngest son began to speak. And I in my second book, I mentioned the rationale that I had at the time. I had not studied bilingualism. Had I studied bilingualism, one of us should have spoken only Spanish to our kids, and they would have been bilingual.
Okay.
But we as soon as he was fluent enough in English, we switched to English. And my rationale was, we would argue, and we were arguing in Spanish. And I thought, well, our son is going to think that Spanish is the language to argue in. I wanted to speak Spanish because I didn't think it was, it was harder for him to argue in English than it was for me to argue in Spanish. So that's
how difficult.
Our youngest son has spent a year with his grandparents in Peru. And so he knows some Spanish, but he did not become fluent, I guess, because he didn't have it, study it 8 hours a day like I did. Both kids have studied Spanish, but it takes quite a bit to become fluent in another language. Actually, since then, my husband and I have become fluent in Italian because we've lived in Italy. So my husband has a real knack for languages, which helped.
Oh, that's wonderful. Speaking of which, what do you think is easy, since you learned Russian in school and you learned Spanish through immersion, well, in school and through immersion, what do you think is easier, immersion or in school?
I think immersion, I wouldn't say either is easy, but I think when you can practice and you get an ear for it, it somehow, you have to use it for practical things. I'll tell you, when I was in training in Puerto Rico, they sent us out to live with a family for a few weeks. And I was stationed with 3 other women who had studied, they'd majored in Spanish. A couple of them were Spanish majors. Right. And they didn't, I had not majored in Spanish, so I didn't know all the mistakes I was making. And I was talking to the kids, I was talking to other people, and they would not talk because they didn't want it. They knew the mistakes that they would make, and I didn't. So I actually did more talking than they did.
Yeah.
And the kids are really great people to learn a language from because they're not judging you. Right. But actually, in Spanish and in Italian, the people are just glad that you're speaking their language. My husband and I took French, and I've taken some German, and some countries are more critical if you make mistakes than others. Let me just leave it at that. Spanish is one of them.
I've heard about that. Eiffel Tower. Oh, sorry.
Actually, French treated us very well. I've been to France 3 times, and they don't look down their nose on me, but I don't try to. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. I spoke to a French-Hungarian couple one time, and they were saying that the Parisians were more difficult than the people from Budapest. So that's what they had. That was their take on it. But
Yeah.
maybe you spoke better French. I don't know. Maybe they weren't concerned. I love French, but I've actually seen a few YouTube videos where native French speakers are correcting, are listening to Americans speak French, and then they're sort of making comments about it, not jokes, but comments. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But it doesn't matter though. What matters is that you're there and you're trying to do that. So, all right. So yeah, I know what I was going to ask you. Marie, your roommate is it Abancay?
Abancay.
Abancay. Okay. So Evelyn spent 2 years in Abancay, and she was with Marie. That was her roommate. They were lucky enough, she tells us in the book, they were lucky enough to get free accommodations at the education center in Abancay. And Marie spoke Quechua, correct? She was fluent.
Well, because she was fluent, she had lived 12 years growing up in Mexico, in Guadalajara. Her father ran a fabric plant there, I think. So that she was in Quechua classes, but it didn't really, well, I mean, she knew a lot more Quechua than I did, but she was not fluent in it, I don't think.
Oh, okay. All right. But she sounded like she had an upper hand with the Spanish.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I think I say in the book that the same thing happened to me that happened to these women in Puerto Rico. I knew less Spanish than Marie, so I let her do all the talking until one day a guy said, and I understood this, he said, well, why doesn't Evelyn talk? Is she not as intelligent as you? That motivated me. I started speaking.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I speak Spanish.
But I think, I've done a lot of thinking about why we were so compatible. And I think part of it is that her knowing so much Spanish really eased me into the culture and into the language.
Okay.
People ask me if I had culture shock. I have more culture shock when I come back to the United States from a Hispanic country than I do going when I went, that I can remember. I mean, of course I would get homesick,
right,
and things like that. I'm about to put a thing on Instagram about how hard the holidays were sometimes.
Yes. You mentioned that in the book. And so I'm just wondering, because I mentioned to you in emails that I got so hungry every time you talked about your chocolate chip cookies while I was reading the book. So are Peruvians in Machu Picchu and Abancay, are they now making chocolate chip cookies thanks to you?
I didn't see them for sale on the street the times I've been back there. They don't tend to have the sweet tooth that I did and that a lot of Americans have. Yeah. But they did like the cookies and apple pie, and both in Mexico and in Peru. My apple pies got to be well known.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. And it sounds like you were cooking this in a little teeny tiny camp stove or something.
No, well, they're not that small, but they're just like a box that you put on top of these Primus burners that I described. They're just like two little burners that light up, and you just put it on top, and then the heat goes in. And we learned to cook with them.
Yeah. And you had to account for the high altitudes.
Yeah. I'd taken down, the Peace Corps gives you a list of recommended things that you take down. And two things that I can remember. One was the joy of cooking, which I took, and we did that. The other was a hectograph, and I'll bet you don't know what the heck a hectograph is.
No, I don't. No.
It's strange that they put that on the list, and I went to Sears and I bought it. It's in school, when I was in school, they used to make copies by putting a gelatin type thing down, and then you put a master, and then you just put blank pieces on top of the master until it fades out to make copies. It's a modern day copy. I mean, well, it's not modern day. It's an old time copier, what they used to do to make copy. It doesn't matter what it is, but I never used it once when I was there. And when I left, some missionaries bought it from me.
Oh,
And I
okay.
mentioned it was going to come in handy for them to make, whatever things they needed to make copies of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when I was there, there wasn't such a thing as a copy machine or anything like that. But
Yeah.
it turned out we didn't really have to make copies or anything. So
You didn't have, well, you've been back since many times. And so are you even able to get a cell phone connection out there?
yes, everybody's got a cell phone now. Yeah, in fact, that's how we, for 2 years I didn't phone home except through ham radios. Priests,
Oh,
the other Americans that were in the country were Maryknoll priests and Dominican priests. I think they were priests that came out of Boston, that were there in these small towns. We had priests in Abancay, and they were American. We didn't
you
see them
mentioned.
that often, but uh, anyway, they had ham radios. They had a lot more things than we did, and that's the only way I could communicate to home. Nowadays, the Peace Corps people members have the
There-
volunteers have cell phones. They have computers,
Mhm.
all the things that everybody else has in the world. So they can communicate. And we hear from Antonio's brothers and a sister that still live in Peru. So
Yeah. So let's talk about the romance, the hot romance in the book.
yeah. Do you know that was 56 years ago?
Yeah, I do.
We
Yeah,
just celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary.
congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, no, it was really a coincidence. And this is what I say throughout the book and my second book too, that when you write a memoir, you realize all the threads that come together that maybe you didn't realize before, how one thing leads to another. I'll give you an example. It is in the book, but it's very brief. When I was in college, I was in a tennis class in the gymnasium, thank heavens, not outside on a tennis court. And I suddenly, at the end of the class, decided I was going to jump over the tennis net.
Oh,
I'd never done it before, but I'm very impulsive. Well, I didn't. My feet got tangled up in the net and I fell down on my face, and one tooth went one way and one tooth went the other way. And until that time, I'd never been to a dentist, never needed to, never had anything wrong with my teeth, not even a cavity. So I get to Peru, and the first few weeks, well, in February, I had met Antonio back home, but then I had to go to where he went back to the university in Cusco because I had to have a root canal on that tooth
right.
that had fallen out.
Yeah.
And because I was in Cusco for a week, we got to know each other better. And I sometimes wonder if that accident had not happened to me in college, would I have been married to him for 55 years? Because that started, it started slowly. We were attracted, but just because we could get to know each other that way a little bit. And I sometimes think it was because of the root canal.
Right.
Anyway.
And you met his stepfather for lunch. You and Marie met him for lunch one day, and he was telling you about the five kindergartners or five kindergartens that he was going to build in Abancay, and you guys got all excited about that. And then there was that one part where you mentioned that he out of nowhere just said, "Oh yeah, my stepson's coming from university."
Yeah, he said he was in town in
And you're
Cusco
like,
to pick up his stepson.
hmm.
Oh no, he said his son. It turned out to be his stepson because his stepfather must have been like 15 years older than my husband. Eventually, I mean, because his mother was very young when he was born. She was just to turn 17 when he was born.
Oh, I
And
thought she was younger than that. So 17.
well, she was 16 when he was conceived but his biological father then was supposed to bring his mother and him to the States,
Right.
but he never did. He just never did. So when she saw that was fruitless, then she married his stepfather. And I think Antonio was like 12 when she married Senor Adolfo is his name. And yeah, it was just a coincidence that Adolfo happened to be asking for volunteers. And Maria and I had been assigned to this
Yeah.
lovely town on the top of a mountain that I described how you got there. I mean, you had to take horses and
Very
jeep.
difficult.
Yeah, very difficult. Yeah, no, the Andes Mountains are, what did I say, is 17 to 24,000 feet high. They're very high mountains. They're twice as high as our Rockies, by the way. Yeah,
Twice as high as what?
the Rocky Mountains.
Oh, okay.
I discovered that in my second book. I was writing about taking a trip with my sons to Canada, and well, Montana has the Rockies in it. And I thought, wow, they're half the size of the mountains of the Andes. I don't know if that's significant, but you learn a lot when you write.
Compared to what you had already been through.
Right. Yeah. Very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And it's like every time it's funny. It's like, I don't know about you, but whenever I watch The Sound of Music, when it gets to that part when they're in the graveyard, I'm always like, on pins and needles, like, oh God, I hope they're going to make it, even though I know that they lived on and, they were real people and the book was written by these people. Through the whole thing, I was like, every time I see that scene, I'm like, oh, I hope they're going to make it. So it's like, even though I know you're alive and that you're going to make it, every time you were describing going down the mountains and the switchbacks and everything, and the hope it wasn't going to go over the cliff and all that, I was like, oh, I hope she's going to make it. It's like, Jeannine, she's still alive. Of course she's going to make it.
Well, not only that, some people were disturbed by the fact that, since my husband had a stepfather whose name was different than his, they get through the whole book and they don't know if the romance is going to last. Now, people who know that he had me change his first name, they know that. But people that didn't realize that were quite upset, actually. They said, well, we couldn't tell that that's who you ended up with by looking at your last name. And I kind of wanted it to be, I wanted people to sit and be on pins and needles wondering what was going to happen, because that's what makes a good book. People keep reading to find out.
Absolutely. And that's what I was trying to get at, is that the way you describe the scenes of going down those switchbacks, and even when that was one time you were supposed to go on a helicopter, and for some reason I kept thinking, oh, I bet that helicopter is going to crash. I just thought the helicopter, because you see that it's so predictable in a TV show.
Yeah, right.
I remember in MASH when one of the head of the MASH unit, I forgot his name, but he ended up crashing in a helicopter. So it's always in my head, oh, the helicopter is going to crash,
Yeah,
but
right.
and that was going to be a turning point. But there was so many, and you rappelling. Oh my gosh. Evelyn talks about rappelling down a cliff that is 30 stories.
That was the dam. The dam was 30 stories high. So it had a smooth side. Cliffs are another thing, because they've got jagged edges of rocks, sticking out.
Well, it's obvious that the Peace Corps is not for wimps.
Well, they don't do that kind of training anymore. This is what is called outward bound training. And that was, well, actually, there are places that do outward bound training, but Peace Corps doesn't do that anymore. They used to train in the universities, and shortly after, in the late 60s, they switched and they train volunteers in the country in which they're going to serve, and they use Native people to train them, which makes a whole lot of sense. But I loved going to Cornell University and then to Puerto Rico. I mean, because I had not been to the East Coast, and I certainly hadn't been to Puerto Rico, and that was all, more travel and more excitement for me. But now they do it differently, and they may even have cut down the number of months that they train. I know they have upped the number of months that you serve. When I went, it was a 2-year commitment from the beginning of training until you got out. And now the training is separate, and you serve for 2 years. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things have changed. So
I don't know. I think it kind of made a lot of sense to have that vetting process, because then you get, people who are really serious and who are not going to be about when they get there, because
I'm sure.
Vetting.
I'm sure they still do some vetting. I'm sure they do, because it's lost money if you're training someone and then they can't fulfill their obligations.
Obligation. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, but they just do it in the country, which would give people a real idea of whether they want to spend 2 years there or not.
Okay. Well, so what is there any stories that didn't make it into the book?
Well, one of the things that you had intimated that nobody has ever mentioned is, were there people in the book that I met that I didn't mention? And I thought, well, I had to really think about that. If they weren't exciting and they didn't move the plot along, I didn't put them in. But there was a time that Maria and I, we had some vacation and we went to the jungle, and we caught a plane from from one jungle town to the next one, and the pilots let us fly the plane.
Oh, oh my
And that was really not only interesting. Yeah, well, they were young guys, and so were we, and I think they wanted to show off. Not only that, but we didn't have a place reserved to stay, and I think since they travel all the time, I remember we stayed in one of their houses. They just let us come and go as we pleased, and free rent. We were always for that. We were always looking to save money.
Yeah.
Because volunteers don't make that much. We live at the level that the people live at, and I think we got like $100 a month
Yes,
to
that's
live
what you
on.
mentioned.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, but there were nuns at the convent that were very interesting. Mostly German nuns, some lovely ones. And I had heard after we left that one of the nicest nuns ran off with somebody and left the convent. So that would have been an interesting story had it happened while I was there. Would have been all over town, I'm sure. And then we had the youngest bishop of the Catholic Church that existed, I guess, in our town. He was the youngest bishop, but he started an orphanage, which I thought I was going to work in, but it didn't get completed in time before I left. So they were just, minor characters. You have to limit the names of people. Like, you can't have similar names.
Right.
People get confused.
Exactly.
And I know Larry, who figures in part of it, I took a big chunk of his. We were an item when we were in Peace Corps training, and then when we got to Peru, we weren't. I even arranged for him to be stationed near me instead of at the coast. That's how I do things. I control things. But our romance never went any place. And so one of my editors said, well, take a lot out about what you put about Larry, because it doesn't go anyplace. So,
But you did have quite a lot of people who were attracted to you in Mexico, and there was quite a number. Well, there was that one special guy. I can't remember his name, but Pancho? No. There was a special guy.
Inocencio was one.
Innocence, yeah.
I've tried to find out what's happened to him.
Oh, you don't still write?
No, we don't. No. They were all really neat guys. And wait till if you get the second book, I put a picture in. I've always continued to be attracted to Latin American guys. They're just delightful. I love them. And I went to Mexico and to teach in a university in Guadalajara, and I went to the coast one weekend and broke my wrist. It's a long story. It's in the second book. And the most handsome doctor, who was the orthopedist for the professional soccer team that they figure in how I broke my wrist. I put a picture of him in there because he is so handsome. I was just looking at that the other day. I should show it to you. And I thought, wow, if women don't drool over that, I have no idea whatever happened to him. But if women don't drool over that, I mean, I don't know if it's because my father had dark hair, but he had blue eyes. So, he really wasn't Latin. So anyway, lots of exciting new things in the second book, but first you got to read the first one.
Yeah, right, exactly. and I'm going to read the second one because I have read the first one.
Oh,
And
great.
you can actually pre-order the second one on Amazon, correct?
Right. Yeah. You
Okay.
can go to your local bookstore and order it too, but it'll come right after it comes out if you get it on Amazon. So, and it
Okay.
might boost my rating too. I don't know. The second book is very different because some of it takes place in Peru. There's some surprising connections with Peru, things that happen, but it gives you a good insight into a career in education too. It has a lot to do with that, and self-help types of things. I have a whole chapter in there of how different retreats that influenced me. So
Oh, that helped. Is this retreats for multicultural couples?
No. My husband never participated in things like that. Um, they are like women's mysteries and
Oh,
a
okay.
couple weeks in the Arizona desert, heart something or other, and just developing my spiritual side and
Oh,
yeah, no,
you're
it's
getting in touch with your Shirley MacLaine.
yeah, kind of,
Um,
yeah.
um,
Um,
or what was her name? Who wrote Wise Woman or no Medicine Woman? Lynn Andrews.
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, I love that book, Medicine Woman. It's a really good book. And then I mean, way back in the '80s when we were all learning about metaphysics for the first time, Shirley MacLaine and Lynn Andrews,
Yeah.
Marianne Williamson and Deepak, they were all
Well, there are a lot of books written about how mysterious the area around Cusco is. Yeah, and Shirley MacLaine does mention that. And then there was a book a few years ago, and I read it while I was in Peru, Celestine
Celestine
Prophecies.
Prophecy. Right, I've read that book. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, what ruined it for me is where they're saying that two cities that I knew were close together. I couldn't believe that the people actually were in that part of the country because of the way they describe things there. And I was very careful in my book to be actually factual and not invent, I got from here to there in an hour. I mean, I of course, now you can look everything up on the internet and find out how long it takes to
Mm-hmm.
get from one place to the other. But
Yeah.
because when you write
Oh, sorry.
a memoir from so long ago, 60 years ago, now I had journals that I could refer to, but there are a lot of things that you forget.
Right.
But as long and conversations, exact conversations, nobody remembers exactly what was said.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you're true to the emotional tone, that's acceptable with memoirs. So,
Well, yeah, exactly. Same thing with like historical fiction. As long as the history is accurate, obviously you don't know what the person said to each other unless you do have their diaries or journals. But yeah, so Machu Picchu, that is kind of, doesn't it have a lot of extraterrestrial kind of stories?
well, people say things have happened. It is a real spiritual experience to go see what is there. And even in Cusco, they still don't know exactly how those walls that fit so close together, and some of them are made out of granite and some of them are made out of limestone, and so they didn't have the wheel, the Incas didn't, and they didn't have what they would have needed to cut the boulders. So that's still kind of a mystery. And so anything that's kind of a mystery is, you can say, oh, maybe extraterrestrial. Well, the part that I think I like to imagine is when there's an area called the Nazca lines, that if you're above them, you can see that the lines in the dirt, it's an area that they don't get any rain. It's on the coast, Nazca is, and they have done huge drawings of monkeys and spiders and I think a bird. And these were done, during the time, I think before the Incas. I think I put in my book when they were done. A friend of mine wrote a whole book about some of these mysterious things in Peru. Yeah, there are a lot of really amazing things. Really, when you can't explain something, then you put it in the realm of mystical. So,
Uh-huh.
so until we can explain them, they'll seem mystical.
Right. And it's like Stonehenge, where every year you're getting a story about how we still don't know how those stones got there, and there's some new discovery of where they came from or what's buried underneath or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
and it's those mysteries that we love.
Yeah.
I have you been to Mount Shasta
Mm-hmm.
in Northern California? I went there, and being in that, I don't know if this happened to you because you didn't mention it in the book, but when I went to Mount Shasta and started hiking up to the part where tourists can hike to, because after that you have to put your name in a registry and all that. I remember that I couldn't stop laughing. The high altitude made me
Oh,
so giddy. It was like I was just laughing, and I was like, I didn't notice anything spiritual about the mountain. I didn't get any woo-woo kind of feelings or anything like that. But I just noticed that I could not stop laughing. It was like, what is going on? You know?
well, this lack of oxygen in the brain, which
Yeah.
can be dangerous.
Makes me a little loopy.
I've never associated that with laughing, but it could explain why I was always so happy. At least that's the way I remember it, except when I would break up with Antonio.
Yeah, you were in love.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah. Was it the high altitude or was it falling in love that made
I
you
know.
giggle?
I know. And there was that tension too in your book. You were constantly, there was a lot of that bickering going on between the two of you, because you didn't want to give up your career, which I think that your integrity speaks, it's spoken very highly in this book, that it was so important to you to focus on your career and do the goal, achieve the goals that you had set for yourself. You were very stubborn about that. And I wish more young girls could be that stubborn, because I mean, of course, there were some consequences. So your plans did get changed. But at the same time, that romance was heated up even more because you were so stubborn about your career goals. You weren't giving in all the time, but it was causing a lot of bickering.
Yes, and there's even more than what I put in the book. Somebody complained that it just went back and forth too many times, and I didn't. I maybe that's maybe half of the amount that it went back and forth. That because I had a lot to come back to.
Uh-huh. Yes.
But I always felt like he was out of place where he was, and I think part of it was the social worker in me, that I didn't really have to save him, but I thought, and I do think every once in a while I'll ask him, what he thinks would have happened had he stayed in Peru and we not gotten married. First of all, I don't think he would have found his way to the States, even though he was highly motivated. That's what I wanted. I want him to prove
Yeah.
himself. He had to, get himself to the States, and then I would see about marrying him.
Uh-huh.
But as things happen, I don't think that would have happened. I think it would have been too much of an obstacle. And the other thing I didn't realize is how much he loved me. I mean, it still is hard. I mean, I had never experienced anything like that. What I had experienced was my culture, where you have a work ethic and you thrive and you succeed and all of that. And love, I mean, I at first, when I first started writing the book, I thought, well, I really hadn't had that much experience dating. And then I started making a list. I thought, oh no, I had. There just was no spark with the American guys I went out with, but there was always a spark with the Latin guy. So, and I think it was an emotional part of me that was lacking, being raised the way I was,
Yes.
that I just craved that emotional honesty.
Yeah.
And that's what Antonio had. And in the end, when it counted, like I was on my way out of Peru, really. And thank heavens, the phone call and the letter that I got said, come back,
Oh,
you know.
what if
I
you
mean,
hadn't gotten that phone call or the letter?
right. Yeah.
There's
Things.
always these what ifs, but it's fate. I mean, it's like you two were meant to come together. You were meant to get together at that last part in the book. You were meant to be married for 55 years. I mean, it was already, the universe had already written the story and you were just playing it out.
Well, you'll see in the second book, it wasn't that easy. And there's so many things. Now, I don't recount arguments or anything, but there were just so many things that happened that normally would have driven people apart. And anyway, so yeah, so
I think that's, I'm sorry. I think that's really important though, that your relationship wasn't perfect, that you had struggles that you went through. And, I think I've mentioned this too, that I teach the Gottman method to my couples in my practice.
And I mentioned to you that I've taken his course.
That's right. Yeah.
And the test we took said that he would have predicted that we would have stayed together.
Oh, really?
An inventory. I may still have it someplace. Yeah.
I don't know. The test, the relationship analysis that they do now, it doesn't actually predict whether a couple is going to stay together or not. That would be interesting. I'd be afraid to tell people.
When well, he has his clinic up in Seattle, I think, or someplace in the thing. Yes. And when I took it, I remember him saying that he could tell within minutes when a couple walked into his office, whether they were going to stay together or not. Now, I only took the course. My husband didn't go, but there was some kind of an inventory. I'm going to go look it up now that you've mentioned. I'm going to go look up that inventory and see.
Well, I think I can kind of sense what he means by telling whether the couple is going to last or not. There are certain things you can see when people come into the room. Unfortunately, as a therapist, you don't see those things when you're live and in person with your own partners.
Isn't that amazing?
It's not that easy.
I've just been saying that over and over and again, how much easier it is to look at somebody else and see their patterns. I mean, for example, if you watch the thing on PBS about Hemingway, I thought that guy should have gotten therapy.
I know.
Oh, I mean, I can just see it. But for myself, it's really hard because it's just really hard to see your patterns and anyway.
Well, I mean, and that's why when I'm working with couples, I'll say to them, practice, 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 because I know that what I'm telling you, it's so easy for me to say this intellectually, but when you get home and you're in a conflict, you're not going to think to yourself, now, what did Jeannine say? What were those Gottman tools I was supposed to be utilizing?
Oh, yeah.
And I tell them, I do the same thing. I make the same mistakes. I'll be in the middle of an argument and, I'll do all the wrong things and act like a fool. And then I'll sit there with my couple. Oh, well, you should be doing this. And I don't say you should be, but right. And I'm looking at it, and in my head, I'm going, ding, ding, ding. Remember when you had that argument? Does that happen to you you're not doing therapy, but
No.
So
there's a book that somebody from She Writes Press just came out and is selling like hotcakes. She's a therapist, has been for many, many years, and she specializes in eating disorders, but she wrote a book called The Girl in the Red Boots. Her name is Judy Ravenor. And when she was doing therapy, she was saying things and she suddenly realized, oh, I'm not applying that to myself. And so her whole book is about her relationship with her mother, which my youngest says that should be my next book, is my relationship with my mother. And I thought, why? I'd rather write about my travels. So.
Yeah. And I think that's your forte, Evelyn. Well, we're going to do 2 more questions and then we're going to come to a close. I hope that people who are listening to this right now are being very entertained by this wonderful discussion that we're having. And I hope that they will get out and purchase your book, Between Inca Walls, a Peace Corp Memoir. So tell me who your heroines are. Which women who was your first woman that you looked up to, and who do you look up to now as an adult?
Well, I remember in high school being enthralled with books by Pearl S. Buck and Margaret Mead
Yes.
and the story of Amelia Earhart, other women who did things,
Mhm.
exciting things. I mean, since then I read so many other books, West with the Night. I mean, any woman that has taken on something. But I also read Louisa May Alcott's books and Emily Dickinson's, and uh,
Right.
during the
As
summers
well.
during the summers in Montana, when I wasn't working, or maybe when I was, my mother would get the school to open up their library for us. And they had, all the classics, and I just read. I mean, The Robe and, a whole lot. But most of my favorite books happened in other countries. And so there were both men and women models. But when I wrote the book, I started to think of who did I model my life after, because I didn't really follow the same path my mother did. But my mother's best friend had grown up during the Second World War in Belgium, and I used to work for her, and she would tell stories. Yeah, that's in the book. And then a teacher that I had, and her daughter was my best friend, and we would compete for the best grades, which helped us both raise our grades in school. And so I kind of think there was something that I saw in certain women, and things that I didn't like in women that were just being beholden to boyfriends or husbands or something. I just was really critical of that. So I think that's who influenced me. If I did ever write a book about my mother, she did very much influence the work ethic of all of her kids. I mean, we had to have jobs, and we had chores and all of that. And I just suddenly realized in the second book that my parents had 5 kids within the span of 9 years, which is a lot of little ones running around. And I was the oldest. And
Yes.
she did not believe in having her kids take care of the other kids. Of course, we had our jobs, but I don't feel like I was a substitute mother to my siblings. And
No,
I don't
I
any
didn't
of
get that sense either.
yeah, that can happen in a lot of families. And then, in fact, I have somebody I worked with who would not have children because she had been a mother to her own siblings, and that ruined it for her in terms of raising her own kids. But so I think, and the other thing I was going to say, that I don't know if I recommend it or not, but to know who you are early, because then you can spend a lot longer developing those skills. And what I mean is, I didn't realize when I went, the book starts with I'm going up a hill to find the source of water that ran in front of the school every spring. And I guess I was naturally curious, but my parents did not squelch that curiosity,
Yeah.
as long as I did my chairs and followed the rules of the religion and all of that.
Mhm.
I was allowed to be who I was and develop the way I wanted to, I guess, or just a natural way. And then when my father insisted that I go to high school 60 miles away, and I didn't live at home, and I was the only one of the 6 kids that did that. And so I really became less bound by family laws and rules. I think, I don't know what it was. I think I was able to develop who I was meant to be without a lot of backlash, or saying, no, you shouldn't do that.
And that's really important, that parents allow their children to grow, not squelch their spiritual developments that's coming out, or allow them to be those adventurers. I think, and the fact that, you and I both worked at like 12 years old. Yours was a little bit more rural, living at somebody's house and having to get up and make their breakfast and so forth and get the kids off. But mine was just babysitting, and working in an ice cream parlor eventually. But that was, and I think you mentioned how much money you made at the
Oh, in my diaries and in my journals, I always put what things cost. And I have to stop doing that when I write books. For some reason, the numbers are very important to me.
Oh, I love that. I think it's important because it's historical. It's keeping you in sync with, it's keeping you in that historical moment because you're looking at, oh, the sandwich only cost 10 cents or she only made $5 a week. You know, it keeps that historical, keeps you in that moment, in that time period, instead of taking you away from it, which I think is very important. So who is your, which woman is your heroine now as an adult?
Oh, wow. I don't know, women that speak up for themselves.
Okay.
Kamala Harris, I've watched her from the beginning because she's from California, and I could see that she wasn't somebody that could just be bowled over. I mean, she gives it a lot of thought. Trying to think if there are people that, well, it's interesting because in college I had nuns as teachers, but they still had their unique personalities. And I explained how different their influence was on me when I was in college. You know, Supreme Court justices, Sotomayor, and I mean, I try to read as many of the books that they put out about their lives. Mm-hmm. And I'm always encouraged by, you know, people that are born into poverty and then get education and make something of their lives.
Yeah, well, you know, and you've talked about some things already that I meant to say, emotional intelligence, you know, that's what you were talking about when you were talking about that wherewithal that you had as a young child, and knowing who you were and where you were going in life. I think that speaks to emotional intelligence.
There's 3 chapters that I left out of this book, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them. I may offer them as, you know, extra things if people buy my book. I'm probably going to do that. But my editor and I worked months on these chapters, and it was about an incident when I was in junior high where I said something and the whole school ostracized me. I mean, nobody would have anything to do with me because they said I had lied. And I stuck to my guns. I mean, I had physical manifestations. My mother, you know, was sympathetic at that point, and it was very traumatic for me. I used that once because I did counseling in the schools sometimes when I worked there, and I remember a girl that was being bullied, and I explained to her that once had happened to me, and I think that helped her. But I didn't realize in this small town how many bullies there were, and I wouldn't be bullied. Now, I had to come from a strong home in order, and my parents would stick up for me too. I mean, they didn't chase the kids down that tortured me, but it was when you write a memoir, the way I was trained is you look at what the highlights were of your life, the pivotal points. And that was a pivotal point, and I don't know what to make of it, except that I stuck to my guns no matter what they said.
Good for you.
In a critique group I was in, one of the men said, well, I mean, you did kind of lie. And I thought, oh my gosh, I always thought I hadn't lied. I mean, he had a point. I'll put it someplace so that, you know, people can read it someday, but because it just shows that at that young age, I still had a mind of my own. And
yeah. Well, good. So what's next for you is the second memoir.
Well, I got to sell a lot of my first memoir first.
And I think you will. I think you will. I hope you will. And, you know, I didn't mention that Evelyn and I met because we were in the California Writers Club together, and we were in a critique group together that I think I started or somebody started, and that was such
you
fun.
Started the whole Fremont area writers, you and Bob. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I'm always on to some kind of a project. You know, I'm one of those people. I'm still that 12-year-old babysitting, and going home and listening to Donny Osmond and reading Laura Ingalls. And, you know, I'm always got my hands into something. I can't sit still.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm going to end the recording. Thank you so much, Evelyn, for being my very first interview on my video blog. And I hope viewers, you will be seeing this on YouTube and discerninggal.com. And I hope you've enjoyed this. And I look forward to bringing more videos, interviews to you in the future.
Well, great. And I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.